picnic. A great time was had by all, except for the person being hanged, I would imagine. Now this fence that y'all see around the periphery of the square, this was used as pikes upon which heads would be placed in the mid to late 1700s. And if all of that sits a little weird with you, makes you a little uncomfortable, and you think maybe moving closer to the cathedral will offer some comfort, that area in front of the cathedral where all of the tarot readers are, that used to be the execution grounds. So hundreds, if not more, people were shot point blank right there outside the cathedral. Wow. Now the #1 killer of New Orleans till 1905 was yellow fever. 1853 was the worst summer for it. It killed 10% of the population. Oh. So that's just about 7,000 to 8,000 New Orleanians in one summer. Averages out to anywhere between 200 and 250 people a day dropping dead. They ran out of space in the above ground tombs, started with the shallow graves on the outskirts of town. Y'all shouldn't be shocked at this point to hear that it rained, okay? They also start stacking those bodies chest high like firewood down Père Antoine, sorry, that's that side, and Pirate Alley. And those are the alleys on either side of the cathedral. So after a couple of days, y'all, the whole city does start to get this aroma, at which point we get dubbed the necropolis of the South. Welcome. Now, let's see if moving into the cathedral would offer that comfort we've been looking for. So inside of the cathedral, y'all, super beautiful. It is pretty breathtaking. This is the part they let you see. I'm about to show y'all the part they don't let you see. That would be the stairwell to the crypts, y'all. There's about 50 people entombed in the floor over in St. Louis Cathedral. So back in the day, when I say back in the day, like late 1700s, early 1800s, if you had money, you'd be buried over here to y'all's right, floor of the cathedral. If you did not have money, you'd be buried over here to y'all's left, banks of the Mississippi River. Yeah. You may note that's not a particularly old picture, okay? Now, the Mississippi River is unkind to both the living and unliving alike. There are 7 to 9 currents going at any given time, which is why it is illegal to swim in the Mississippi River. It is not about how strong a swimmer you think you are. Those currents are real strong. Not to mention, you may be aware that the Mississippi River begins at Canada, snakes all the way down here. There are human remains all hundreds of years. Just stay out the Mississippi is my point, y'all. Now, when we have those torrential rains, those tropical storms, occasionally things will pop up. Now, it is not the norm, but it does happen every few years or so. Now, I want y'all to use your imagination. Okay, we're going to say it's 1805. It is in the dead heat of a Louisiana summer. A new wealthy person has just been placed in the floor over at St. Louis Cathedral, and we're all showing up for Mass 3 days later. How y'all think it's going to smell in that cathedral?
Pretty nasty.
Yeah, that's where the expression "the stinking rich" comes from. Because they were literally stinking up the place. Yep, can't say welcome enough, y'all. So they went through a couple of issues with the burial, how to deal with the dead bodies here in New Orleans. So I was saying that you have to dig 75 feet to hit solid ground. We're all standing on silt. Okay, did I say that part already? Deposited by the Mississippi River. So basically watery sand. That's why our sidewalks can get real dangerous. It is always wise to look down when walking in the city of New Orleans for a variety of reasons. That's why we've got potholes that will total your vehicle. And that's why in 1718, the French start trying to bury their bodies 6 feet under, 4.5 feet down. Like I said, the corpses start floating. So what do you do? Well, to me, common sense would say we only have but so much high ground. What high ground we do have, we could really use for the living. Cremation? Yeah. But this is a Catholic city. And until the 1960s, it was against Catholic law to cremate. The French were like, y'all gonna have to figure something out over there in the New World. We don't know what to tell you. So the French Canadians, who I can only imagine are having an awesome time creating a port city out of an alligator-riddled fetid swamp, do find the one place they can dig a full 6 feet and not hit water, which turns out to be our natural levee system. Or in other words, they decide to carve holes into the thing they expect to hold the water back, and then they stuck dead bodies into the holes they created. Not the wisest choice. Once those torrential rains come that we're so known for, they absolutely have bloated corpses popping out of the side of the levees like mushrooms, floating into town, looking for level ground. People had to bury Cousin Boudreaux like 3-4 times. It made for a very complicated mourning process, as I'm sure you can imagine. By the third time we bury in Boudreaux, resentments are building. Okay? It just is what it is. So they decided to go back to in-ground burial. Now this time, in order to navigate that shallow water table, they decide they're going to drill holes into the bottoms of the caskets. That way they can dig the full 6 feet down into the mud, the muck, and the water. And if you hung around long enough after Boudreaux's funeral, it would be punctuated with the sight of either one large gentleman, maybe 2 medium-sized gentlemen, jumping down into the hole on top of Cousin Boudreaux's casket and repeatedly jumping up and down on top of Cousin Boudreaux's remains to beat him that extra 1.5 feet down into the mud, the muck, and the water. The friends will help him out, dump some dirt in, jump back in, level it out, do the hokey pokey till we're level with the ground. Slap up a headstone, hope it stays put. Now this worked a little bit better than that original Levee experiment, but after a few more torrential rains, what is below comes above. Not only that, but those holes they drilled into the caskets have actually added air pockets, and as a result, caskets popping up out of the earth like champagne corks. Or as one of my coworkers refers to them, corpse rockets. Now, should that casket hit up against something solid, like say its own headstone, it's gonna burst open, spilling its contents everywhere. And it is the same casket jumping guy's job to kind of figure out whose parts go in which box. Now, there is some evidence this guy was not scientific in his methodology. Okay, there's a gentleman who had a pool put in his courtyard here in the French Quarter in the 1970s. It is affectionately referred to as the Pool of Souls because 15 caskets were unearthed in the process. And just so y'all know, that's not supposed to happen. Okay, when you move a cemetery, you are supposed to take the human remains with you. Right. But apparently never been sticklers for perfection here in the city of New Orleans. Now, y'all, it's not that they only found 15 caskets. The contractors explained they were only 5 feet down. They kept hitting caskets. His pool was going to get more expensive. Rumor has it he had them stop at 5 feet, and you can feel the caskets under your feet in the pool. I don't know if it's true, but I love these New Orleans rumors. Should you find human remains on your property, you got to call the police to find out who these people were. And because we're one of the oldest colonies in the nation, archaeologists. So his pool's getting real expensive. The police come through, they start cracking open caskets. They find that some contain 2 pelvises, 3 hands.
That's not normal.
They think the guy responsible for putting the pieces back was kind of like kicking dead body parts into the closest box. Like, who's going to check my work? Right? Close enough. Now, the people of New Orleans are having a bit of a rough go of it. Dead body parts float by on a semi-regular basis, adding a whole other dimension to the aforementioned complicated mourning process. Cemetery builders decide the obvious answer to this problem is to put a fence around the periphery of the cemetery. Now, the job of this fence is to kind of serve as a colander for human spaghetti. So the pieces will stay in, all the rainwater will strain out. Post-rain, it is carnage in that cemetery. And on the warmer days, and here in New Orleans, we mean hot, the people of New Orleans can absolutely smell what's going on in the cemetery. Everybody starts freaking out that they're getting sick from miasma. That's like the bad air that comes off of dead bodies. That's not what's making them sick, y'all. What is making them sick is while that fence is doing a decent job of holding the pieces in, some of the dribbly bits have been getting into the well system. Which means that unbeknownst to them, the entire city of New Orleans have been drinking like a people tea to go with your human spaghetti. That will make you sick, y'all. Drinking dead bodies is not good for the body, mind, or spirit. So finally in 1789, St. Louis Cemetery number 1 is consecrated. That is our first above ground cemetery, still operating to this day with 15 to 20 interments annually. But what that means, y'all, is that from at least 1718 till at least 1789, they were actively chasing dead body parts all throughout the city of New Orleans. I cannot say welcome enough. Now, New Orleans largely started with death. We are the one of the top murder capital. No, we are the top murder and missing persons capital per capita city in the nation. We worked really hard to get that. Thanks, y'all, for supporting us. Stay in your groups, okay? You don't just come up missing in New Orleans. It usually involves illegal substances. Not Canal Street, that's where we are. Bourbon Street, and then going places with people you don't know. So, you know, you get those good fuzzy feelings. You feel like you know these people your whole life. That's how you come up missing, okay? Stick with your folk, you'll be okay. I've been in the French Quarter for about 5 years now. I still more or less know where I am. Now, we're about to bisect Canal Street, y'all. Look to your left and your right as we do so. I want y'all to take a look at the median going down the center. So we're about to bisect that median. Y'all may or may not be aware, but in New Orleans, we refer to our medians as neutral ground. It is because of this median in particular. The reason being, 1803, Louisiana Purchase, we are supposed to be an American colony. But the French are absolutely not allowing the Americans to settle in the French quarter. They forced the Americans to settle upriver. So this side of Canal, which was real square and puritanical, that side of Canal still stayed very French, very laissez-faire, do what you want because you want to. The only place where the French and the Americans could do any form of business negotiations without gangs of New York-style knife fighting was that median. So it became known as the neutral ground. And as a result, New Orleans refers to all of its medians as the neutral ground. Cool. Now, speaking of boundaries, y'all, the city of New Orleans, I'm going to show a picture of a map of New Orleans in 1770. This should look somewhat familiar to y'all. It's the French Quarter. Yeah. That used to be the entire city of New Orleans. The reason being, the French Quarter is the official high ground. It is about 9 feet above sea level. We're real excited about those 9 feet, y'all. Each one of those feet we're real excited about. Now, the French, when they're colonizing the area, they only know how to build an medieval, that's the word I'm looking for, a medieval style city. So they put an actual rampart, hence Rampart Street, but a big stone wall around the periphery of what is now the quarter, but at that time was the city of New Orleans. This is a map in 1770, so that means at that time we were under Spanish rule. The Spaniards actually make that wall taller, thicker, stronger. They reinforce it. And this is important, y'all, because not only are they trying to keep certain people in, they're trying to keep certain people out. That said, in a couple blocks here, we're going to bisect Camp Street. Camp Street, while we were under Spanish rule, was known as El Campo de los Negros, the camp of the blacks. And the reason that it got that name, y'all, is that 1789, while we're under Spanish rule, the only documented successful slave revolt to occur on land happens in Haiti. The Haitian enslaved overthrow their masters, and then some of those Haitians decide they're going to come on to New Orleans. And the Spaniards absolutely do not want their slaves finding out there has been a successful slave revolt just over there across the pond with y'all cousins. Right? So they're trying to keep them as far out of this wall as possible. So I think this next intersection is Camp Street. Okay. So this next intersection, this was the camp of the blacks. So definitely doing their best to keep them as far out of the city proper as possible. Now, this is when Haitian Vodou gets to the city of New Orleans. However, Vodou itself gets to New Orleans in 1719 with the first shipment of enslaved West Africans brought to the port of New Orleans. You don't have to be in New Orleans long to put together that voodoo is big business here. Okay? The term voodoo itself is a Western mispronunciation. I know of 3 proper pronunciations: Vodou, Vodun, and Voodoo. The term itself means pure light and spirit in the language of the Igbo, West African tribe. The religion itself has only been called Vodou for about the last 400 years. That's not even zygote status as far as Africa is concerned. Okay, the religion itself is an amalgamation of the religions of 4 major West African tribes. So, namely the Dahomey, the Ewe, the Fon, and the Yoruba. And then I'm gonna put a pin in that because we're about to be at our next stop. I'm gonna pick it up and tell you what Vodou is not. And I always end the tour. I'll come back to Voodoo Queen Marie Levee. She's my favorite story. So we're gonna talk about Vodou, then we're gonna talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, and then after our beignet stop, I'll wrap up by talking about Voodoo Queen Marie Levee. Now, just out of curiosity, is anybody staying at Le Pavillon? Super beautiful hotel, y'all. Super, super haunted. Of course, otherwise, why would we be stopping there? This is a picture so you kind of see the pan of it down. It's coming up here. It'll be over here on y'all's right. And then we will also make a U-turn so that when I'm done telling the story, you'll actually be able to see from further away. But yeah, Le Pavillon, super, super beautiful. As I said, super, super haunted. Le Pavillon does boast having the largest collection of crystal chandeliers in the nation. So here's a picture of that crystal chandelier room. All right, y'all, it is right here on your right.
Nice, that's pretty.
Yep. So, Le Pavillon, stunning, haunted. This is a picture of their crystal chandeliers, y'all. Now, this is my favorite picture of the chandeliers, not just because of the coloring.
Oh, look.
But where you see this diamond design in the floor right here, our native population has always maintained that there is a portal between worlds where that diamond is today. Which means you have a 100% crystal chandelier suspended above an open portal being charged 24/7. That might explain some of the cold snaps that people experience in that room. Some people also say that they get that little frisson, that little shiver. I've heard that being described as feeling like somebody just walked over your grave. There will be bursts of cold air with no discernible source. Most people actually attribute that to that open portal and all that crystal, right? Now, the most popular ghost story here at Le Pavillon is that of Ava. Ava was around 8 years old in the 1840s when she was here in New Orleans with her family for a steamboat cruise. So you got to kind of picture this. This is mid-19th century. This whole concept of being a tourist city is a new concept. Every major metropolis in the world wants to be one. Crescent City is no different. Ava gets lost in the bustle, y'all, and she is trampled by a horse and carriage right here on Pontchartrain Street. Tragic way for her to pass on. She's apparently still hanging out around these parts to this day. People say that a little girl in 19th century garb will approach them asking for help finding her family, and they will inevitably lose her when she darts into traffic and vanishes from sight. Now, you also don't have to be in New Orleans long to put together that somebody in outdated clothing is one of the least eyebrow-raising things you will see while you're in the city of New Orleans, right? But to even the coldest of hearts, losing a child in traffic, that makes an impression. Now, the best story, oh, and by the way, of course, we feel like she's reliving that death. But the best story about Ava actually came from the bellhop here at Le Pavillon. He said that he was waiting to open the door for the inhabitants of a limo when he clearly saw Ava's reflection in the side panel of the limo. So he kind of slowly turns to his side, sees nothing corporeal, slowly turns back to the limo, clearly sees Ava's reflection. At this point, he reportedly jumps into the limo, which I understand is frowned upon in his line of work. But in his defense, right, you see a reflection, you see no one standing next to you. That's enough reason to start breaking rules. And honestly, y'all, it's New Orleans. We really don't need reasons to break rules, okay? Now, if you are the kind of person where ghost hunting is for you, the room you want to get at Le Pavillon is room 301. The most recent story we have out of that room is 2018. There was a physician who was here for a medical conference, and he was staying in that room. He said he began to stir out of his sleep in the middle of the night when he felt the weight on the bed shift as though someone had sat on the edge of it. Now, this was not what woke him up. So what brought him to full consciousness, y'all, was the cold, bony fingers that he felt pushing his hair off of his forehead. He said he opened his eyes and was looking into the face of a wizened old lady who assured him, "You are safe, you are with me forever and ever." He was not comforted by this. I can't imagine why. He definitely checked out within the hour. He said that as he was throwing stuff in bags, the closet door just slammed shut of its own volition. And at that point, his relationship with New Orleans was over. Okay? And I'm like picturing this man of science, right, having this insane experience here in New Orleans. Now, if all of that is not enough to let y'all know that something ain't quite right here at Le Pavillon, I think we can at least agree that the idea of peeping toms is a creepy one, okay? They do have a bit of an issue with that here in Le Pavillon. However, their peeping tom tends to levitate outside the 5th and 6th floor windows, respectively. So, what's creepier than a peeping tom? A dead levitating peeping tom.
Yeah.
Welcome to Le Pavillon, y'all. Now, as far as I put a pin in that last conversation, so I kind of want to pick that up real quick. Now, so I was explaining that, oh wait, before we do that, we're about to make this turn, so y'all will actually be able to see the chandeliers, but you have to just stay looking outside of the left side of the bus so that you don't miss it. Y'all see? Yep.
Nice.
Super beautiful, and once again, super haunted. All right, y'all. So this is an art piece that shows, it depicts the first shipment of enslaved West Africans that were brought to the port of New Orleans in 1719. What I love about this picture is though it shows that we were successfully enslaved. Where you see this mask, that is indicative of the Egun. Egun translates in Yoruba to ancestor. So it means we didn't come alone, okay? So so that's when Vodou gets here in 1719. Now, when we were brought here, we were forced to be baptized as Catholics. Vodou is a monotheistic religion. We believe in one God, Bon Dieu, good God. That's the same as the Judeo-Christian God. It's the same as Allah. It is God. And then we have the Loa and the Orisha. The term Loa is what's used in Haitian Vodou. Orisha is when you're talking about Ifa, Santeria, Kondo, Malay, Lukumi, Kibanda, etc. What the Loa and the Orisha are the principalities of God. So the whole idea is that God's too busy for us to come to him with each and every little thing. Gave us the Loa and the Orisha as intermediaries, identical to the function of a Catholic saint. Although the Loa and the Orisha are centuries older. than the saints. What those enslaved did was they found the saints with similar traits to their Loa and Orisha. They traded one for the other so they could continue to practice their religion out in the open. This way a slave master could come into the slave quarters, see his slave praying over an altar, and tell himself he's got a good Catholic slave. Now, I'm not sure how great a follower of Christ you are owning other human beings, but story for another day. What happens over time, y'all, is that some of those enslaved appealing to the saints, they start to form their own relationship with those saints, resulting in a particular sect of Vodou known as New Orleans Voodoo. This was a syncretic religion, meaning it was a marriage between the West African traditions I mentioned and Catholicism. You have many New Orleans Vodouisans, that's what you call someone initiated in Vodou, who also considered themselves to be devout Catholics. They did not feel it conflicted. Now, I'm speaking of it in past tense, y'all, because New Orleans Voodoo was extinct. It has been since the early 1900s. At that point, some Catholic officials went around the city of New Orleans confiscating anything that looked like it was West African, Caribbean, or Native American, and they had a big bonfire in front of St. Louis Cathedral. At that point, New Orleans Voodoo goes underground and then more or less disappears. Now, there's a neo-New Orleans Voodoo movement happening in the French Quarter, I think. I don't know anything about it. What I can't speak to firsthand is Louisiana Plantation Vodou, of which I am a high priestess. Ain't no marriage between those West African traditions I mentioned and Catholicism. What we will do is begin every ritual with the Lord's Prayer. That is our way of acknowledging the saints for allowing us to hide behind them during slavery so we can hold on to our traditions. So it's not that you don't believe in the saints, and you absolutely have respect for the saints, they were just never yours. So you honor them, and then you move on. This picture is of a gentleman named High Priest Roby. You might actually see him in Armstrong Park. He is also a tour guide. He is a high priest in Louisiana Plantation Vodou, as well as a Hungan Osobwe in Haitian Vodou, which means high priest. His family now owns the plantation over in Bayou Sara, Louisiana. That used to own them, and that's as of 6 years ago now. So he's definitely the real deal. And I'm sorry to disappoint y'all, but this is what Vodou looks like. So you'll note the absence of baby eating, blood bathing. None of that. Okay. Yeah, it's all about worship, like all about worship and about helping your community. That's it. Ain't no more to it. Now, as far as voodoo dolls, because y'all are going to be inundated with them here in the city of New Orleans. They'll be at the gas stations by the cash registers. In the movie, you have the doll, you stab the doll. The person who the doll is of feels that stab. This is called sympathetic magic, largely used in English witchcraft. They're called puppets. That's where we get the word puppet from. 1950s, Hollywood decides they're going to start making voodoo movies. They cross this idea of the voodoo doll and the puppet. Now we have this idea of pins and dolls. 9 times out of 10, if you were dealing with a Vodouisan in the 17 or 1800s who had pins and a doll, you were also dealing with someone we would consider a homeopathic healer today who was illiterate. In order for them to keep track of what herbs they'd given you to treat what part of your body the last time you came to see them, they might have a little drawing of you, or they might have made a little cloth doll or even whittled a wooden one. If you came home with a migraine last time, they're going to stick a pin in the head. There might be a scrap of cloth of a certain color underneath that pin. That cloth color is supposed to remind them which herb they gave you, so they don't make you sick when you come see them again. They were early medical records. So as far as these voodoo kids here in New Orleans, I'm sure they're very cathartic, but you're not actually practicing Vodou. Especially because Vodou is not inherently evil. Now, where that idea came from, y'all, all the way back to the only documented successful slave revolt happening in Haiti. Those Haitians overthrew the French, then they overthrew the Spanish. And that scared the hell out of those Europeans. And that's during a time where, of course, slavery isn't evil. That's our way of life. What threatens slavery is evil. Not only that, but the only way they've been able to reconcile doing the heinous things they've been doing to the Haitians, they've convinced themselves the Haitians are subhuman, certainly not on their same intellectual level. They figured the only way they could have been overthrown by them is they had to be able to summon the devil with their drumming, their singing, and their praying. That is the root of where we ever got the idea that Vodou is evil. Questions on all of the above? All right, y'all. Anybody by any chance staying at the Pontchartrain? It is the most haunted city. It's haunted hotel, rather, in the city. It is over here to y'all's right. That is the courtyard of the Pontchartrain. Next to it, you'll see the Bayou Bar, which is the bar at the Pontchartrain. So it starts here at this courtyard, goes all the way to the end of the block. The Pontchartrain opened as an upscale apartment complex in apartment complex, that's not correct. Not complex, y'all. Apartment building. So we're talking about, like, think Manhattan, okay? An upscale apartment building in 1927. And it became the most haunted hotel due to a fire that happened here in 1930, in which 25 to 30 people died. Now, 1927, when it opens up, we've got two sisters who have the run of the 11th floor, okay? And this is kind of the last gasp of the flapper era. They're probably enjoying their freedom before it gets kind of ripped away from them, right? Having a good time here at the Pontchartrain in their swanky apartment. And the sisters become really good friends with one Mr. Lyle Schaffenberg, who is the owner of the Pontchartrain. Lyle's very fond of the sisters. As I said, sisters are real fond of Lyle. Lyle rapidly becomes more fond of one sister than the other. I'm sure we can see where this is going. Lyle's gonna propose marriage, y'all. The unchosen sister is left feeling incensed, to say the very least. She stews on it for a while, and then she comes to this conclusion, you know, if heaven forbid something tragic were to befall my dear sister, well, it would just be me and Lyle to comfort each other for the rest of our days. But it has to look like an accident. So she decides she's going to head down to the 10th floor apartment beneath their 11th floor address and set fire to the ceiling of the bedroom beneath where her sister sleeps. I'm sure no one will be shocked to find that she rapidly loses control of the fire. She manages to set herself on fire. As she is running out of the room, she is setting fire to everything in her wake. She burns alive, her sister burns alive, and around 27 other people also burn alive in that fire, including a newlywed couple who was on the 9th floor minding their own newlywed business, okay? Super tragic. But the newlywed couple is said to still hang out on the 9th floor to this day, y'all. People say usually you encounter them around the ice machine. So I'm not sure if they're trying to cool off from all that fire, y'all. I like to think that they're still celebrating their honeymoon, okay? I'm picturing big buckets of ice, big bottles of champagne. That's just the romantic in me. However, people do say on occasion they feel as though they're being pushed or tugged into the direction of the newlywed couple's room. So I'm not sure if it's like monogamy just got old after 70, 80 years, but they do on occasion try to bring new people into their room. Now, my favorite ghost at the Pontchartrain, and I do this for a living, y'all, so I have favorite ghosts, Isidore Toots Washington, piano man. His heyday in New Orleans was the 1920s and 30s. By the 1960s, he was the pianist here at the Pontchartrain at the Bayou Bar. Now, 1984, the man had a long career, okay? He's playing on stage at the World Fair, and he is going to kill over and die. Very, very traumatic for all concerned. I was like, I know some therapists that got paid that day. Now, even though he died on stage at the World Fair, he spends his afterlife here at the Pontchartrain. They said around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, you hear the tickling of the ivories. Some people report seeing specters pass through the walls where the doors used to be on their way down to catch Toots' late night show. Some people even report seeing a very well-dressed gentleman with a lady on each elbow. It's been inferred that that might actually be Lyle with the two sisters. And they figure they're stuck here for an eternity. They may as well be civil enough to go see the occasional piano show in the middle of the night. So that is a little bit about the ghosts here at the Pontchartrain. Now, out of curiosity, can anybody tell me who this guy is? Dracula, portrayed by? Bela Lugosi. Yes, the first Dracula. Now, y'all, when I learned this tour, I found out that Bela Lugosi actually came into the nation illegally in 1920 through the port of New Orleans. I was like, of course Dracula illegally came into the nation through the port of New Orleans. Like, that just makes sense, right? He didn't stay long, y'all. He made it big as Dracula in New York fairly quickly. But he's the blueprint for the old school, like, classic vampire, right? So that whole accent, I want to drink your blood. Y'all, he talked like that because he was Hungarian. But of course he was our first Dracula, so we were like, that's totally the vampire accent. That's how vampires talk. Why do Hungarians all sound like vampires? I don't know. Yeah. So he set that blueprint, y'all, even for the vampire on Sesame Street, right? Very Bela Lugosi vampire. Now, I did get into a debate with a friend. We were arguing about who our favorite vampires are. She maintains her favorite vampire is Queen Elizabeth. I said that my favorite vampire is the vampire from Sesame Street. And she was like, oh, he doesn't count. I was like, oh, I assure you.
He does.
He does. Yes, absolutely.
One.
Now, here in New Orleans, yep. Now, here in New Orleans, you are in Vampire Central. That is largely owing to the late, great Anne Rice. She passed away about 3 months ago, y'all. She is now an ancestor. She was an amazing author. Probably most famous for The Mayfair Witches and The Vampire Chronicles, which for those of you under 40 is not to be confused with The Vampire Diaries. That is the equivalent of comparing Katy Perry to Aretha Franklin. Okay? Katy Perry music, real cute. but she is not Aretha. It was the Aretha Franklin of vampires, okay? Now, of course, she was already famous in the 1970s for writing the Vampire Chronicles, but in the 1990s, Hollywood options the rights to Interview with a Vampire, creates that blockbuster film starring Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, and a younger Kirsten Dunst. Some of the lore that she used in that story, she actually took from the lore of New Orleans. Yeah. So, creepy little vampire girl Claudia, who in the movie was played by Kirsten Dunst, she is found by the vampire Louis, portrayed by Brad Pitt, born in New Orleans. 1-bedroom flat, her entire family is dead, and she's this 8-year-old little girl, the only one left alive, and she's with all the dead bodies. They all died of the plague. And Louis rescues her and turns her, right? So the immigrants of New Orleans had their own folklore around the undead, and they felt like they were the #1 targets for the undead. Because today you gotta have money to live by the water. Historically, that meant you were poor. That's where you came in, that's where you worked, it was dark, it was creepy, and they believed the undead would feed on immigrants because no one would come looking for them if they were missing. So that was actually Anne Rice. She was actually a really adept historian as well. So that was her taking from some of the folklore here in New Orleans. All right, y'all, we have reached Buckner Manor. If you saw season 3 Coven of American Horror Story, this was Miss Robichaux's Academy for Gifted Girls. This is one of 3 opportunities to get off the bus. We're going to talk about some history of the house, some of the hauntings, and take some pictures so you can post them online and everyone can be jealous of you.
Yes. Oh, you want to go? Okay, you gotta go? Go. Okay.
So welcome to Buckner Manor, otherwise known as Miss Robichaux's Academy for Gifted Girls, so kind of a Hogwarts for K-12 girls in season 3 Coven of American Horror Story. The mansion itself is 163 years old. That is a respectable age here in the city of New Orleans. It is just over 8,000 square feet. It is owned by a couple, privately owned by a couple. They do not live here. It seems that they use it solely to rent out to filming crews. Last time I looked, it's about 20 grand to film here. So if you were looking for an economical place to do some low-budget home videos, just scrape together the 20 G's, rent out the Buckner Manor, and then please invite me over because I want to see inside. Now, only the exterior shots for season 3 Coven were done here. The interior of the school is on a soundstage somewhere. My guess is the floor plan of the actual mansion didn't work for them. But all exterior shots were done here, including, so real quick, if you haven't seen season 3 Coven and you plan on watching it, I'm going to say things that sound like spoilers. I need you to trust me, they are not. Nothing in season 3 Coven is as it seems, okay? But toward the end of season 3, the girls are going through their 7 trials to see who's going to be the next Supreme, right? And my friend David maintains that the next Supreme was really Stevie Nicks. Now, they're going to start playing with telekinesis, teleportation. Young Zoe is going to impale herself right up there on those spikes that I have highlighted.
No.
She straight up skewers herself, y'all. It's pretty messy, okay? So that exterior shot, those exterior shots were all done here. Now, as far as ghosts here at the Buckner Manor, the ghost people talk about the most is that of Miss Josephine. Miss Josephine was enslaved to the Buckner family, and she worked in the house. She stayed on after the Civil War as the paid maid. And people say that sometimes they can hear sweeping in the hallway when no one corporeal is out there. Sometimes the chandeliers will sway ever so slightly, like she's still out there dusting. I will say she sounds like one of the friendlier ghosts here in New Orleans. Most of our ghosts are real upset, y'all. If I've managed to convince you that we are, in fact, the most haunted city in the nation, and you think that means it's a great time to get a Ouija or a spirit board, just just want to remind you, we are so haunted because we had the most active slave port in the nation. You're not going to be conjuring Casper, okay? Leave it alone. We got enough tortured spirits over there on Bourbon Street. Now, we all know that the people who run the house are the people who work there, not the people who own it, and apparently that's even more so true after death, which means Miss Josephine will pop up whenever and wherever she feels like it. However, it is said that if anyone with a modicum of Buckner blood crosses that threshold, she will materialize on the main staircase to welcome them home. Now, as far as the building itself, it did used to serve as the Soule Business School, and their slogan is here on the ground, right in front of the main gates. It says, from education as its leading cause, the public's character its color draws. And when I first read that, I was like, why does the business school slogan sound like a spell? Right? Like it's all rhymey, you know? And people were asking, did they ever teach witchcraft here? My answer is, I don't know what extra credit looks like at a business school in New Orleans, okay? That could be Witchcraft 101. But as far as we know, they only ever taught business here. Questions before I start taking photos for boats? Okay, so the way this goes is I usually stand right here and people stand in front of the gates. They hand me their phones, I take pictures, and then y'all get on the bus once your pictures are taken.
Cool.
Okay. Oh, she's ready. Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Fine, get over here.
Do you want your mask on or off? Down. And we're gonna have a little Stevie Nicks interlude, y'all. While this happens, let me turn her up because that's the only way you listen to Stevie Nicks.
That's true.
That is true.
Just like the white wind sings a song, sounds like she's singing. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Just like the white wind sings a song, sounds like she's singing. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Lafayette Cemetery number 2. This is your next opportunity to get off the bus. We're going to talk about above ground burial practices and a little bit more about New Orleans history with the dead. You might be like, who wants a used casket? Apparently goth kids. Apparently goth kids want used caskets. That lets me know that I was never hardcore about the life. That was my freshman year of high school. I was definitely not still in caskets. All right, let's walk a little bit further down and talk about some other
Black part.
That I've highlighted right now, this is called a family tomb. This is hands down the most popular style of tomb in the above ground cemeteries. Anybody want to take a wild guess how warm you think the interior of one of these tombs is capable of getting at the height of a Louisiana summer?
250 degrees.
180, 250, anybody else?
450.
Nah,
So
what?
between 350 and 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 5 months out of the year.
Like an oven.
So pre-1960s, here's how it would work. No embalming. The body goes in either an untreated pine box or a shroud. It's going to be put in that tomb for a minimum of a year and a day. You get the extra day because there's a Creole belief that if you bother the body a year to the day or before then, the spirit might follow you home. And no one's trying to see our ancestors like that. They're also making sure the body's in there through one Louisiana summer. 5 months at 350 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, no embalming. Now, y'all know what happens to a turkey when you leave it in the oven and forget about it, right? So when that year to day is up, that tomb tender can remove that closure tablet, chisel out the brick from behind it. You are more or less a pile of ash. It was a loophole in that no cremation thing, right? Because we didn't do what God did.
Yeah.
Our tombs just happen to look exactly like pizza ovens on the inside. Now there might be some larger bone fragments left behind, maybe some skulls, some pelvic bone, gold teeth if you were lucky in life, kidney stones if you weren't. At that point, the tomb tender is going to take a 10-foot pole and brush your remains to the back of the tomb. That's where that expression, I will not touch that with a
10-foot pole.
comes from, because that's what they would use to brush it to the back. Now your remains are going to spill down a shaft. I've been told that's where the expression getting the shaft comes from, but the jury's still out on that one. Those remains are going to end up in a caveau, which translates from French to English as little cave. That's an unfinished basement beneath the tomb that never fills up, ash to ash, dust to dust. I just hope y'all like y'all family, because it's going to be an eternity of a family reunion. Now, y'all, what happens if it's the summer of 1853? Our family tomb has 2 vaults. It's that yellow fever outbreak, and 4 of us die. Let's walk a little bit further and find out.
At the same time?
More or less.
Wow.
Yep, that's a tree that grew up through the center of a tomb. Now, luckily, that is not a southern live oak, so it does not have that huge trunk that would have definitely screwed up everything for this poor kid. Now, the style of tomb that we're looking at is kind of hard to see because it's in the dark. The tree is actually growing out of the tomb behind the one with the vaults, which is a little bit shorter. But those vaults, the ones you see, the 3 across, 5 down vaults, we're using that as an example. This is technically also a society tomb. But if we were at Lafayette Cemetery number 1, this is number 2. If we're at number 1, there isn't a fence like this around the periphery. There's a solid brick wall. And if you were able to enter the cemetery and look at the front of that brick wall, you would see vaults that look identical to that. Just all the way across, all the way down, lining the entire periphery of the cemetery. Those are called wall vaults. So in the real estate world of the cemetery, those would be the apartment complex. So those 2 extra family members we had in 1853, we're going to rent a wall vault for each of them for a minimum of a year a day. When that year of the day is up, if we have a family tomb, the tomb tender will get the remains and sweep them into the family caveau. If not, your family can come get your remains. Or some of the wall vaults actually have communal caveaux underneath them. You're just hanging out with your neighbors. Now, if you go into any of our above ground cemeteries, you might actually see some of the wall vaults that have nameplates. Those would be the condos of the real estate world of the cemetery. Families have actually purchased those wall vaults. Now, a quick word about the nameplate check. It does not matter what style of tomb. turns out it costs a lot of money to have characters chiseled in the stone. It used to be $20 a character. Y'all, my full married name is Malika Friedberg Gilbo. Ain't nobody paying for all it. I'm one of them people they would have just put in there and that would have been all she wrote, both literally and figurative. There are some tombs that you'll see that will have a filled up nameplate on the front, a fresh one on the side, or vice versa. That will be because they ran out of space along that original nameplate. So what I'm saying is these tombs can technically hold an infinite number of human remains. It just used to be a matter of time. Now, in the 1960s, Catholic Church lifted the ban on cremation. People will more often than not be cremated at a crematorium or at a funeral home. And now they do something called pouching, which means that you get your own little pouch with your name on it, and they're going to put your remains in that pouch. Some people have started adding shelving to their family tombs, so it's a little bit more organized than the old camo situation. I did get to talk to a funeral director here in New Orleans, and I was asking what happens if there's spillage between the crematorium and the pouch. She said that they have a consecrated shop vac, which is basically a blessed dust buster. Okay? They're going to vacuum you up into the holy vacuum cleaner bag, and then they're going to put you back in your pouch. I love New Orleans. The place is so weird. Now, all of the information I'm giving you tonight might have led you to believe that they do the above ground burial in New Orleans because they were because of the shallow water table. That's maybe 30% of why they started doing it. The other 70%, y'all, a lion's share, they were doing it in France and Spain, and New Orleans wanted to be cool too. Above ground tombs have their own problems when hurricanes hit. They're definitely not foolproof. It is a status thing. In New Orleans, it is definitely not uncommon to have a house note, a car note, and a tomb note. Ducky said his grandparents fully expect he and his sister to keep the papers up after they die. I don't want to be worried about mortgages after death, okay? Now, as far as the tombs, if you've decided that above ground burial here in the city of New Orleans is for you, where you find out about above ground tomb space for sale is the real estate section of the paper. They are neighborhoods, y'all. Mark Twain coined the phrase cities of the dead to describe our above ground cemeteries because that's what they look like and that's how they function. Now, the cost of a plot, just the plot, not the tomb. The cost of a plot the size of one of the family tombs, those house-looking tombs, easily run you 30 to 50 grand. The tomb itself, another 50 to 100 and up, depending on how ornate you want your tomb to be. This does not calculate into the equation the perpetual care plan that is now mandatory for you to buy into most of our above-ground cemeteries. That's an escrow account. And as long as it continues to accrue interest, they will keep up your tomb for you. Now, it's mandatory because 70% of each of our above-ground cemeteries that are still functioning, they're abandoned. The families have died and gone away, which means whatever damage that happens to them, that damage is permanent. So the other 30% they're trying to keep up as well as they possibly can. Now, there is a nonprofit organization called Save Our Cemeteries who will sometimes adopt an abandoned tomb and refurbish it, but you have to have done something like, helped invent jazz or something, which is not just doesn't apply to most of us, okay? Questions on anything before we get back on the bus?
I can't believe they're still buying above ground tombs here, that they can still do that. That's wild.
It's a status thing.
Yeah. I mean, I want one. I want a mausoleum for sure.
Oh, you want to ornate one?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello? Can I get a condo, please?
I mean,
What, the kids can be buried in it too?
oh, yeah.
Got cold quick.
Oh, God.
Resting place up. Actor Nicolas Cage.
Oh, shit.
Oh dear.
Y'all, this is his future final resting place. He's still alive, y'all. Okay. And this is in St. Louis Cemetery number 1. That is our most popular cemetery, our most famous cemetery here in New Orleans. It is the believed final resting place of Vodou Queen Marie Laveau. It is the final resting place of Homer Plessy of Plessy versus Ferguson, otherwise known as Separate But Equal. The black man who actually sat on the train, he's entombed there. And it's the future final resting place of actor Nicolas Cage. Wow. It is the only real estate he still owns in the city of New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
Now, as far as what he was most known for owning, the Lafayette Mansion on the corner of Governor Nichols and Royal Street. So for those of you who saw season 3 coming of American Horror Story, this was the address of the woman portrayed by Kathy Bates, so the real woman. Those of you who did not see it, one of my favorite things about this tour is I don't have to tell the story, but I'm going to tell you the main points, okay? Delphine Lalaurie was a serial killer who tortured and killed several enslaved people at this address. Nicolas Cage finds out about it. It's our most famous ghost story, okay? He thinks it's cool. He comes here in 2006, goes on a private tour to hear everything about the house and then some. And he decides that it'd be really cool to live in a haunted house. He goes on Letterman. He said, I got friends with waterfront property. I've got ghost front property. He thinks this is the best place to write his great American horror novel. He moves his whole family in. He moves them all right back out 4 weeks later. Put his $3.33 million mansion back on the market. Attempts to do so for a profit. Goes so far as to get a condo in the brick building directly across from the mansion. Refuses to spend another night in the mansion he himself owned. Now, 2009, the IRS catches up with him. They're like, hey, Nick, about those back taxes you owe us. He's forced to declare bankruptcy. The banks foreclosed on a bunch of his properties, the Lalaurie Mansion being one of them. As a result, the only real estate he still owns in the city of New Orleans is this tomb in St. Louis Cemetery number 1. Because apparently the one thing the IRS cannot take from you is your final resting place, which has started a rumor amongst the tour guides that that's where he stashed all of his money. Now, because it is our oldest cemetery in the city, there are strict rules as far as what styles of architecture are allowed in the cemetery. The official name for this style is Egyptian Revivalist, but we do know he had just finished his National Treasure movies when he purchased the tomb. We think he was going through his Masonic phase. The inscription says Omnia ab uno, which means all from one or all from one source in Latin. The nameplate is empty. That's because Nicolas Cage was born Nicolas Coppola. Very Italian. Italians do not put their name on their final resting place until they're ready to get into it. I feel like that's a healthy rule of thumb. Okay? Now, occasionally you will see lipstick marks on that nameplate. That is because a superstition has arisen over the last 15 years or so that if you have an audition and you kiss Nicolas Cage's tomb, that audition is supposed to be successful. I'm going to go with don't put your lips on public property in New Orleans. And maybe especially not the cemeteries, but it is the city of do what you want because you want it. It's also been struck by lightning at least 4 times.
Wow.
Should you go? Yep. Should you go into the cemetery? You can't really see it. There's right here they refurbished over it. I know because I've been in the cemetery. You can actually see where they refurbished over some of the cracks. That happens for a couple reasons. Most people just make fun of it. They say it's Nicolas Cage's energy and that's why it's getting struck by lightning. I don't have no beef with Nicolas Cage. What it is that pyramids were constructed to conduct electricity effectively. And apparently they do.
Oh.
Okay. Also, the interior of this tomb is aluminum-based rebar. So it's a real expensive lightning rod. We have now entered the city of the dead, y'all. This is a half-mile radius in the city of New Orleans where there are 10 to 12 above-ground cemeteries within this half-mile radius. Over here to y'all's left, this is Greenwood Cemetery. It's the overflow of Cypress Grove. This is the second cemetery that was started largely for the fire societies, so the firefighters in New Orleans, though the majority of the people in the cemetery are definitely not firefighters. Once we get a little bit further and closer to the light, you'll actually see a Gothic Revival style tomb with a fireman in the center of it. And what makes it Gothic Revival will be, so some of y'all can see it, some of y'all might not be able to see it yet. But it's what makes it Gothic Revival, y'all, is the arched openings in the steeple. Now, right next to that, as we move a little bit further down, you'll be able to see the Elks Lodge tomb. You'll know it's the Elks Lodge because of the elk on top of it, y'all. It's called the Tumulus tomb. Tumulus just means hill, but tumulus is like way fancier, y'all. One of my favorite things about the Elks Lodge tomb is, first of all, what they did to raise the money for it in the early 1900s. Y'all, they held a burlesque circus. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds amazing. Okay. Now, when they unveiled the tomb to the rest of the city, they had a processional out here. They rode elephants. They had burlesque dancers dancing alongside the elephants. I was like, where'd y'all get elephants? Like, they just, if all that, they're amazing. Now, if that's not enough for you to have like a place in your heart for the Elks Lodge, y'all, this last holiday season, they put a glowing red nose on their elk, and that is when they cemented their place in my heart. Okay. I was like, the Elks Lodge clearly knows what life is about.
There you go.
It's about burlesque circuses and Rudolph. Now, you'll see that as we move up. But if you look over here to y'all's right, where you see that tall pillar, that is the final resting place of Irad Ferry. He's the first martyr of the fire societies here in New Orleans. He was a firefighter who actually died fighting a fire. Over here on y'all's left as well, right, sorry, trying to remember the mirror. This brick wall, these are wall vaults. So there are human remains all throughout this wall. It runs all the way behind the bus shelter and continues. I was like, only in New Orleans can you be waiting for the bus, knowingly leaning against human remains. We have arrived, y'all, at morning call. So this is our beignet and bathroom stop. Our goal is to make this as close to a 10-minute stop as possible. So we're going to agree on what time it is so we know what 10 minutes from now is. And you'll go up these stairs and the doors back there.